right, hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and today it's round two. I'm bringing back a couple special guests to continue on our discussion from last time. So in the first place, we have David Kemball-Cook, or David KC for short. Welcome back to the show, David.
Thank you.
Awesome. And unfortunately, I had to invite a heretic. I'm really hard up, but we also have David Russell here. Welcome to the show, David.
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
I'm good.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. So yeah, if, just for people who didn't maybe see the last show, we invited David KC on the show because he was recently a Biblical Unitarian, and he's now lost his faith in the Bible or in Jesus. He still is a general theist, but we brought him on the show with me and David Russell to kind of discuss what are some of his reasons, why has he changed his mind on that front. And at the end of the show, we were having such a great time that David KC was saying he would like to come back to discuss specifically the problem of evil, both in terms of general theism and also specifically to the biblical God. How does the Christian God handle the problem of evil? So that's what we're going to be kind of looking at here. Yeah, just before I turn it over to David KC to give his sort of opening presentation on that, do either of you guys have any announcements that you'd like to make, or what have you guys been up to since you've been on?
Well, I'll go first. I don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, PRA is rocking it out. I mean, we're still throwing out interviews and videos and debates. It's very fun. We just actually, speaking of the whole Unitarian bit, we actually did a very well-prepared discussion with some Unitarians on our show. And we took the Trinity position, obviously, and being a gentleman from CSG, his name is Tyler Fowler, a good friend of mine. He wrote me in, and it inspired me to get back into Greek. So I'm taking Greek 1 now, again, because if you don't practice, you lose it. And I noticed that what I lost more was the pronunciation, right?
Mhm.
I was really bad, and I was like, man, I need to sharpen my stuff here. But it also gave me a great love for getting back into historical apologetics and the historical research end of it, because I think that's where my strongest suit is in that area. So yeah, man, I loved it. I got to talk to some great people throughout as we were preparing. Philip Carey, philosopher, we got to talk to him about Nicaea and some of his work that he's working on. And yeah, man, we just talked to a whole bunch of great people as in the lead up to that. And believe it or not, we only spent an hour on the discussion, or we spent the whole hour on Philippians chapter 2. But we set up such a great rapport that these guys want to talk to us again. So we're going to try to walk through each of the scriptures as best we can. So, and I'm happy for continued dialogue. And those guys were really happy because they had a debate like a month previously, and they were kind of like, they were attacked pretty bad. They were, it was like rough for them, but they loved the way we approached it and stuff like that. So I'm blessed for continual dialogue. But other than that, man, it's been a rough week here. We had put down our cat, and he was only 2. He had FIP, which is a fatal cat disease that affects young cats. And yeah, so it's been rough for the family. I've worked a lot this week, 13-hour shifts all week. So I'm a little burned out, but I'm here and I am ready to see what David's got for us.
Awesome. Yeah, David KC, I'll turn to you if you want to make any announcements kind of thing. And feel free.
Just of interest is that I've just been, I'm just watching at the moment a Pine Creek video. You know Pine Creek, don't you?
Yeah.
And he lines up, this is the once saved, always saved question, which is another of the problems that I raised last week. I said I had about 12 issues that numbered that caused me to doubt, question my faith in Christianity, and the whole area of sin and salvation, once saved, always saved, is part of that. And in the video, Doug from Pine Creek lines up the scriptures for and against once saved, always saved. And they pretty much match, there's a good list from the New Testament on both sides. And he plays through a debate between James White and Trent Horn, where James White is, of course, taking the position that once saved, you're always saved. And Trent Horn is the Catholic apologist, and he takes the opposite position. And each of them has plenty of biblical text to back them up. And it's a really good debate, and their cross-examination is most interesting, with a very good commentary from Doug. And so that's been the latest thing that's been interesting me. But it's showing really that the Bible really is not clear on salvation. It's not clear. Once saved, always saved. Maybe yes, maybe no. Texts that back both points of view. So anyway, to the problem of evil, which is another of these issues. Yeah, if I could share I can share my screen.
Yeah, sure.
So where's my PowerPoint? Here we are. Yeah, okay. So that's a summary. So can you both see?
Yep, problem of evil, logical argument.
Okay, good. So now, just thinking about evil, like, I was just talking to my wife the other day about it, saying, I'm going to do a dialogue with some people about the problem of evil. And she said, what? Why? Why on earth? Want to do that? God is good and there's evil and there's free will and everything. And why? What's the problem? And so I just trying to think down into layman's terms. It's what is the problem? And it comes down to, why should God create evil in the first place? If God is good and his creation is good, whence evil? Why bring evil into it? Does God create evil? Well, surely he does. And Isaiah 45:7 actually says that, if you read the King James translation. He created creatures, according to the Christian narrative, he created creatures with sinful natures, and he created nature with tooth and claw, doesn't he? That's some famous phrase in a poem, I think. But couldn't he have just done it the other way around? Created a nature where the lion did lie down with the lamb from the beginning. Why leave it to the end time, if you like? Why do we have to have great disasters? Why not make earth like heaven? And I know we're going to be talking about free will defense, aren't we? But one of the points there is that in heaven, according to the Christian narrative, there will be no evil. There will be only good, and people will do good things, I presume. But nonetheless, people will exercise free will in heaven, presumably. So why not make earth like heaven from the beginning? It just leads you to question, why on earth do we have evil in the first place? And so if you're a theist, if you believe that there's some kind of God who created everything, then that leads you to think that this God had other concerns than being benevolent or loving. So anyway, we want to look at the PowerPoint. Okay, so what I'll do is outline, we're looking at the philosophy now, trying to go into in depth and the general issues here, the logical argument from evil, and then we're going to look at what they call evidential. I've written here evidential stroke incompatibility arguments. These are arguments against the existence of God based upon evidence which seek to show that such a God does not exist. And then thirdly, evidential inductive arguments. These are arguments that try to prove not that God does not exist in the Christian sense, but that such a God probably does not exist. The existence of such a God is unlikely. Then we're going to get into three ways in which the argument from evil could be, or an argument from evil could be argued against, if you like. Outright refutations, which is just saying the argument's wrong. A theodicies, which will slightly weaker than a refutation, but seek to justify by saying that for any evil that we might think of, God has a reason for it, and we could give that reason. And then defenses, which are kind of weakest possible form of counter, which would say that, well, there might be something that doesn't make the argument go through, but we're not quite sure what it is, but there's some doubt about it. So let's just have a look here. So I've got a slideshow, slideshow, current slide. So the logical argument from evil, this is to say, to try to outline in a logical argument that shows that the Christian God does not exist. So we're talking specifically about the Christian God here. And so we've got here a premise. Now, I don't know, David and Dale, are you familiar with this kind of arguments, either of you?
Yes.
So we've seen it before, thanks. Dale, have you seen this before?
Yeah.
Good, okay. So what I'll give is just a version that I looked at the Stanford article and I revised it slightly. But the structure is the same. I mean, it will differ slightly according to what version you consider. But first of all, if God exists, then such a God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect. That would be the classical view of God, wouldn't it? Number two, if God is omnipotent, then God has the power to eliminate all evil, both kinds, natural evil like earthquakes and moral evil like murder, for instance, or rape or torture. If God is omniscient, then God knows when and where evil exists, including in the future. So including in that premise is the idea that there is a single future and that God knows that what's coming up in the future. So God will prevent something before it happens. Like, oh, yeah, I'm watching a film called Minority Report. I don't know, have either of you heard of that with Tom Cruise?
Yeah, I have.
Yes, good movie.
Good movie. I'm really getting into it. But they see where by precognition, they have what they call, there's people in the swimming pool who foresee when a prime is going to occur.
The precogs, yeah.
Precogs. And then they send them out to arrest the murderer before he murders. So that's the idea, is that you can, that God is able to foresee all kind of evil that might occur in the future. If God is morally perfect, then God has the desire to eliminate all evil. So again, that's an assumption there, of course, about the nature of God, the Christian God. I put this in here, God accomplishes all that he desires to do and is able to do. It's the thing that came up in this debate between Trent Horn and James White, incidentally, that I was just talking to you about. So God accomplishes all that he desires to do and is able to do. So from these, if evil exists and God exists, then either God doesn't have the power to eliminate all evil, or doesn't know when and where evil exists, or doesn't have the desire to eliminate all evil. Does that follow through? I think so. I think so. If there would be evil, God would know where it is going to happen, has the power to deal with it, and has the desire to eliminate it, so he would eliminate it. But evil exists. That's premise 7. That's probably the most uncontroversial premise in the whole argument, isn't it? I think we can say that 7 is rock solid. So from 1, 6, and 7, God does not exist. Okay. So do you both agree that this argument is a logically valid argument? That is, that the conclusion follows from the premises. Dale and David?
Dale, go first.
Yeah.
I got to read it over just a little bit more.
So yeah, I was trying to prepare my notes, but it seems like it's valid. So you have the if then. It seems like it's valid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Follows through.
I put in number 5 there just to make that watertight, because sometimes we think we might have a desire to do something, but we don't actually do it. You know?
Yeah. That's why I'm going to be objecting to the soundness, but yeah, in terms of validity, it looks valid to me at a glance.
Yeah, to me as well.
Yeah, good. Okay, yes. So naturally, now, as I said, I'm a theist. I believe in a God, some kind of awesome being behind the universe, but I don't think, I don't myself go with premise one. But for a long time, as I was telling you the other time, I was able to get around this argument in my own mind by being an open theist. And so I could say, anyway, that premise 3 for me is an open theist. God, if the future is open, then God may not know. There may not be these precognition of evil, if you like. And although I was not an open theist in order to get around the argument from evil, but it just appeared as a consequence there. So for a long time, the argument from evil was not on my radar as a real problem in my Christianity. It was kind of a lesson. It was there. I was obviously aware of this argument, but I would say to myself, well, anyway, I don't believe that there is a single future. So so evil occurs, and God may not know when or where it's going to occur. But anyway, so I can go on, but what premises for you? I'm now kind of thinking that I would reject one, because I'm not sure that I believe in a God of this kind, that he's omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect in this definition. But what do you guys think? Which premise? You both agree that the argument is valid, that the conclusion follows from the premises. So it's on you to decide which premises you would reject.
Okay, so you want us to interact on the logical problem right away, kind of thing. So yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, David R, I'll let you. I
was gonna let you go first, man. Oh. Go
ahead. So right away, premise 5 is false, and I have questions about premise 2. I could possibly accept it depending on what you mean. So in the first place, yeah, God is omnipotent. So I believe that God is a real maximally great being, as defined by Dr. Eugene Nagasawa. So he has the maximal set of power, knowledge, and benevolence, or perfection, as you call it, goodness or whatever. Let's call it benevolence, to the maximal possible degree. Your argument is, and I would agree with this, okay, well, the maximal possible degree results in omnipotence, omniscience, and moral perfection. Agreed. But what does that entail? Does that entail that God has the power to eliminate all evil in all possible worlds? I don't think so, because at least of the created possible worlds, I would say it's impossible for God to eliminate all evil at all times. And why is that? Well, that gets into the free will defense. Also, premise 5, God accomplishes all that he desires to do and is able to do. Well, there are different levels of desires. So in one sense, well, this isn't about the Bible's God, but in one sense, general theism, a God could desire that no evil results at all, but he could recognize, well, the only way to accomplish some greater good is he has to allow some evil. In a nutshell, those would be the two premises that I'm kind of questioning.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would go off to say that I would agree with Dale on 2. I think that he has the power to eliminate all evil, but there's a means in which he does it, right? So just to kind of break that down further, I think there's a means in which that is going to be accomplished. On 5, I also would say that I lean towards Dale on this. I think it's a means of how he accomplishes all that he desires to do. So I think that, there's a means about how this is being performed and played out in real time. 7, I don't agree that natural evil exists. I do not hold to natural evil. I only hold to moral evil existing. Okay. But that also has to do with my theology as well. So I think there's and what I believe about the nature of the laws of physics and so forth. So yeah, I mean, that's where I would probably come at you with, and then I would also offer, because I don't think the problem of evil can be defended without the free will defense. I think that has to be in there somewhere, especially when you start bringing in moral agents and so forth.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. I would have thought that you would both accept premise 2.
Well, I do accept it. However, I think there's a process that's involved with it. So when I say I have a problem with premise 2, I would come at it from that aspect. You understand what I'm saying?
No.
Okay. So I agree that God is omnipotent and that God has the power to eliminate evil, but how is he doing that? Well, obviously I'm a Christian, so I think he's doing that through death on the cross and atonement. And there's this whole process, this whole theology, there's this whole process involved in real time that is going to end up accomplishing that. And it ends with the eschaton.
Right. Okay. Yeah, well, that's interesting. I would have thought, if I just go to my next slide.
Yeah, sure.
I just noted, I adapted from Mike Tooley, acknowledgement there. But I put in premise 5 and reworded it. Okay, yeah, you see here, now, I would have thought the one in red, I thought that would be the one that you would reject. Number 4. So I got it wrong.
Yeah.
I thought that you both would reject premise 4, that if God is morally perfect, then God has the desire to eliminate all evil. I thought you would cut the knot there and say that God has higher goals or different goals or other goals than to eliminate all evil. And that therefore eliminating all evil is not the only thing that he desires. So as you said, free will, which we'll come on to. So he has a desire, but he also has other desires. So in terms of how you understand desire, we would then, according to my understanding, we would say that God does not have the desire to eliminate certain kinds of evil if they conflict with free will. So then he would not have the desire to eliminate that. So for instance, the Holocaust, God does not have the desire to eliminate that because he values free will of the Nazis higher than that evil. That's what I would say. So I would say you want to be rejecting premise 4.
And I think you're right. Again, you're putting us on the spot kind of thing before we get to like read it over. But yeah, I think you're right. I would. It's the same objection I had to premise 5.
Right.
Like there's no nuance here. You're not. What about
Yeah.
first order versus second order desires? You're just not. There's no nuance in the premise. So yeah.
So yeah, it's how we define desire, isn't it? If we have a ranking of desires, then the question is whether which the top rank is the one that you go with, and then anything ranked lower is still something you desire, but that you don't carry out because you desire something else above that.
Yeah,
So,
and I think I would have more of a defense against your argument here as I heard you defend each premise. So like when you say, does God have a problem with the Holocaust? Absolutely, he does. Absolutely, God has a problem with the Holocaust. But like Dale said, there's these other orders of desires. It needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. Does he have a problem with it? Yes. But does free will exist? And does God intervene all the time to stop certain things? What would he sacrifice if he took away a man's true ability to choose? So yeah, there is a value of freedom that would cancel out all love, as C.S. Lewis would say. And
well, yes.
I mean, to have any type of freedom or love that could exist, I mean, you have to have certain choices, and you have to be able to make those certain choices. So there's a lot that goes there. So I think my whole issue is I would have to see you kind of defend this argument, to flesh out the argument, So I could respond to particular
Yeah,
points.
okay, absolutely. We'll get on to free will, of course, later. Just the question is, this is the logical argument, and I understand it's commonplace that people say there's a logical argument, and then there's a kind of inductive argument, and that the logical argument is not sound, it doesn't work, but then there's an inductive argument which is sound. So now I'm not sure about that, because I think this logical argument, I think it's pretty sound. and I would have said that that you both agree that the argument is valid. So logically, before we get into the details, you have to say which premise you're going to reject. And you said you're rejecting 2 and 5. I would have thought you'd reject 4. But anyway, you've said that, and maybe 4 and 5 together, you would both want to reject, depending how we define desires.
Yeah, and I also reject part of 7. So remember that.
Okay, part of 7, indeed. But we could go through with just moral, and the argument would still work, wouldn't it? If we just had moral evil. Okay, so there's the logical argument, which kind of lays out the bones of the argument, and we've got a fair idea of where we think you would reject, which premises you think you would reject. And so if we get on to now arguments here that we can talk about an incompatibility argument, which states that the existence of certain kinds of evil is incompatible with the existence of God. So it's building on the logical arguments, but we're talking about particular kinds of evil. And then it claims that premise 4, remember premise 4 is, let's look at premise 4. If God is morally perfect, then God has the desire to eliminate all evil. So it claims that if God is morally perfect, then God would have the desire to eliminate those kinds of evil. So talking about particular kinds of evil there. So if premise 4 is true, and if we could combine premise 4 and 5 in a way to make it a composite premise, which would then claim that that is true, those premise 4 and 5 are both true, then there's no good that God would value higher than their prevention, than those those particular evils that we're talking about. So great natural evils like tsunamis or earthquakes, particular natural evils unconnected with humanity, or great moral evils like genocides, torture of babies, and so on. And this is Mike Tooley's argument in his book about the problem of evil, which came out last year, based in part on the Stanford article. And he says, yeah, the existence of God is incompatible with such evils. And he takes the example of type B, that suffering of animals dying in great pain. He's saying there that, yes, there's nothing, it's not connected with humanity that, say, an animal dies in great pain in the forest. Or an omnipotent, benevolent God who is omniscient, omnipotent, could prevent such evils. And there's no reason why God could not do that. So if he was of this kind, then the argument would go through for premise 4, would be premise 4/5 would be true. And therefore such a God would prevent such evils, but he doesn't. Therefore, such a God does not exist. And Tooley's argument is quite detailed, but I've given the bare bones of it here. But we're, as you don't have the benefit of seeing it, we can't really discuss this in detail. But that's the basic idea. Is if there's no reason, the only reason why it possibly might not be valid is if there's such a good as people having humanity, certain humans having pleasure in seeing animals dying in great pain. But there's no reason why that should be a good. He argues that there's no way that could be a good. From definition of morally perfect, So if such humans did take pleasure from human animals dying in great pain, then God would not have no obligation to treat that as a good that he should value. So that's this kind of, it's evidential because it's based upon particular types of evil happening. So it's not logical, and it goes beyond the logical because it provides certain kinds of evidence there for particular kinds of evil, and argues for incompatibility. Now, I respect this argument. I think it has, I don't see any flaw in it, but if we could move on, we could come back to it later, but could I move on to the next one? Would that be all right?
Yeah, this is your opening speech, so
That's my opening, yeah, okay. So the second kind of argument of evil that we might be considering is that popularized, or at least started by David Hume, which is saying that the probability of that God existing, arguing that God's existence is unlikely, meaning usually less than a half. So these are called inductive arguments. So David Hume would be the originator of this kind of argument, which is an inference to the best explanation that because we have a mixture of good and evil in the universe, it's more likely to have come about from an different creator rather than a creator that cares about good and evil. So this is kind of, it's called abduction. It's really kind of saying that it's not a proof, but it's just an argument of probability, which of course, you know, we do all the time, you know, in reasoning about particular crimes or explanations of historical events. If we say that, well, if A, you know, leads to B and that we have a B, then A is a likely cause. You know, it's a likely explanation for B, but it's not a proof, of course, because there could be other things that lead to B rather than A. But these are proofs here which rely on probability, that argue that the existence of God is less than a half in probability. A philosopher also called Rowe gave an argument here: no good we know of justifies evils of kind X. Generalization for that. So nothing that, you know, for instance, torture of babies, genocide, killing everyone in a certain city, animals dying alone in pain or during great suffering. No good we know of justifies evils of that kind. Generalizing from that to it's likely that no goods, known or unknown, justify this kind of evil. So it's a generalization. The defense against that is, of course, that you don't know. There could be such goods. So these are arguments of probability, which philosophers love, you know, so lots of literature goes into this. There's another argument here, which is a basic, I expect you're both familiar with Bayes' theorem, are you? At least you've heard of it. Have you, David and Dale? Yeah, Dave's nodding. Dale, you?
Yeah, I know Bayes' theorem. Yeah.
Okay, so he gives Rowe gives a Bayesian argument to show that if the probability that God exists is equal to or less than a half, then applying certain premises, we can prove that the probability of God existing must be less than a half. So it goes from less than or equal to a half to less than a half. Now, all these arguments are arguments about probability, so they're called inductive. And I don't have a lot of time for them myself, for what that's worth. I think that talking about probability of God existing is a confusion, because there are different kinds of probability. I make it maybe 6 or 7 different kinds. You know, I think the probability that my baseball team will win tomorrow is a certain kind of event. The probability that Lincoln was assassinated in a theatre, that's another kind of event, different kind of probability. Probability that a fair die will show a 6, that's a different kind of probability. And when we're talking about probability a certain theoretical being existing. It's a confusion between an objective type, which is it exists or not, with a confusion between that and a subjective idea of what is my personal subjective credence of that. You know, so we all carry around with us a kind of scale of subjective probabilities for all kinds of things happening. You know, is it going to rain tomorrow? Whatever, you know, probability of this is going to happen, this is going to happen. There's just a scale between 0 and 1 that we might think about things happening, but that's our own subjective idea. Whereas, but my subjective idea, by definition, is going to be different from yours. So a Christian saying my probability that God exists equals 1 does nothing to the atheist, because his probability that God exists is 0. And there's no way that those two are going to agree, because they have different subjective probabilities. But anyway, all this kind of reasoning, I think, shows a confusion between the two kinds of probability. So I'll move on, if I could. Is that all right?
Yep.
So we're just laying the ground here, just saying it's problematic or confused. Yeah. So I don't wish to place a lot of weight on that. I prefer the previous one. Objective notion conflated with subjective credence. Right, so we're getting into refutations now from the Christian to the logical argument from evil. So the first one is a refutation here. Now, a refutation is something that's what it says. It's an outright refutation. It says that this argument just is unsound and rejects premise 4. So I put that down there, or we might say premise 4/5. God creates evil for his glory. Now, the Calvinist or the Reformed theologian or believer would just say that evil is just there as part of creation, and that what we might think of evil is just our human perspective, but God creates evil for his glory, and the other things he values more highly, which is his own will, basically.
So David Casey, do you mind if I just kind of interject, just kind of ask? So at this point, are you getting into the secondary question of like, what about the Christian response to the problem of evil? Or
this is the Christian response, yes. Okay. So if we think of a Calvinist, so let's just consider James White. So how would James White respond to the argument from evil? What do you think, either of you? Or any Calvinist you can think of?
All right, well, what I wanted to do with this show, I kind of wanted to split up the general theism take on the problem of evil and then look at the Christian take. So if you're wanting to go through everything in your opening case, it's up to you how you want to do it. But like, I do want to.
Okay, yeah, well, I think the logical, the argument from evil is specifically against the Christian God.
Oh,
because remember, because we have, I think I said that at the beginning, because of premise 1.
Okay, so you don't see the problem of evil applying to the Muslim God or the Jewish God or any general theist that has those properties?
Well, any type of God to whom the premises apply, obviously the argument would apply to that God as well. But I think that I don't know a lot about Islam, but they may take this kind of refutation here. But as I understand Islam, Allah determines everything.
Okay, so
which is like the Calvinist idea, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So if you kind of see them linked, then what I suggest, run through your presentation, present everything kind of thing, and then in me and David, when we respond, we can break it up if we want to.
That's great. Okay, so a Calvinist would say that evil is just part of God's creation, which he created. He doesn't value good more highly than evil. All are instruments for his glory. But I question there, if this is the God of the Bible, this is, every literate person's argument, who's a non-Calvinist, against Calvinism, which is that it's this kind of God is callous God, who determines everything that happens and allows great suffering in order to bring his elect to glory. So I question whether it's the God of the Bible or the God of Jesus. That's the Calvinist refutation, and so on. Various examples there of texts, but one can have a number of texts which show that certainly God is described as being benevolent, all-loving. It doesn't match with the Calvinist idea of God, who creates evil for his glory. Okay, so the natural order theodicy. Now, theodicy, remember, is a type of just a way of justifying the ways of God to man. The benefit from preventing any particular evil is outweighed by the potential disruption to the natural order. So this is, let's see, who's it? Van Inwagen, a philosopher called Van Inwagen. He would say that why can't God intervene to stop the deer suffering in the forest, for instance? Well, if God did that, it would be an irregularity in the natural order, which, you know, we'd think of as, you know, we don't see this. We don't see God intervening as a matter of course to prevent evils happening, people suffering, people dying. And if God did do that, it would be an irregularity, observed irregularity in the natural order, which would be, quote, a massive defect. And preventing that would be something that God would value more highly than prevention of evil. In other words, God values regularities, God values natural laws, and so God does not stop people dying of cancer or whatever, because it's more important to him to have a natural universe, a universe with natural laws that always hold. But my argument, objection to that is that Christianity does allow for God intervening supernaturally when he wishes to do so. For instance, raising people from the dead. That is allowed. So this natural order theodicy, I don't think carries much weight. Why not intervene to prevent the baby's torture and animal suffering and agonizing death? Why not? Okay, the soul-making theodicy is famous. So a particular evil is justified by the soul-making benefits involved in allowing that evil. So that's Irenaeus and John Higg. And there's a quote from Irenaeus there: God made humans imperfect, therefore partly responsible for the existence of evil, and so on. By creating imperfect humans, individuals are given the chance to develop and grow through a soul-making process into children of God. But the obvious objection to that is that infants dying in childbirth don't have their souls made. People dying in genocides, how do their souls made? Those tortured to death. So it's a kind of general argument, but does not really apply to particular cases like those. So that's the soul-making theodicy. Now, the free will defense now. So a particular evil may be justified by the benefit of having a universe with human free will. Now, you could call this a free will theodicy, if you like, if you want to think it's stronger. Remember, defense is a kind of the weakest form of defense against the argument, the counter against the argument from evil. So if you want to make it a theodicy, you've got to say that the Holocaust is justified by the benefit of having the Nazis or Hitler having free will. So Hitler's free will is worth all those Jews and other people killed. But a free will defense is more general, is saying evils may be justified in general, overall, by having a universe with human free will. And that obviously is more defensible, if you like. And that's the one that you two have certainly said that you wanted to go with as the most strong, as the strongest form of counter to the argument from evil. And the argument against this free will defense is one I alluded to at the beginning, is why God could not create a universe with free will where people do good out of their own free will. Like allegedly in heaven, where presumably, according to the Christian story, people will have free will, but there will be no evil. So that would be the strongest I think, counter to the free will defense. And I'll just make that point there. If there's free will in heaven where there's no evil, why is coexistence of free will and absence of evil not possible on earth? So that's, yeah. Also, another point is that we allow free will, obviously we have to, yet we have mechanisms to stop really bad evils. So if somebody says they want to kill all the Jews, we don't allow him to do that, but we lock him up, or make it impossible for him to carry out his threat, or prevent in some way. So why can't God do that? Why can't God do that? Why can't God just really stop bad evils, but yet allowing free will? All right. So why could God not do the same? They could have their free will. Hitler, Pol Pot, Stalin could have their free will, yet their ability to exercise it fully could be curtailed. Okay, I think we've come to the end nearly. Skeptical theism defense. This is, again, philosophers have brought this out. It could be just some goods that we don't know of. Again, it's attacking premise 4, which justifies certain evils. And it's related to the Roe argument, but this is not a inductive argument. It's just a speculative logical argument. But I'm not sure you want to spend much time on this here. It's really very theoretical. There's some goods that we don't know of, not free will, not something else, but something else about God, where he values those goods higher than preventing evil. Okay, but then is this the Christian God, or is it some other kind of God? Yeah. We're supposed to see that if we're talking about the Christian God here, and the Christian God is allegedly revealed in the Bible, and we don't have this kind of picture of God that there's some things that he just values enough to stop evil happening. We don't see that in the Bible. But you can argue backwards and forwards on there, because there are also texts in the Bible that say, verily thou art God that hidest thyself, and Isaiah 55, as high as the heavens are above the earth, so are my thoughts above your thoughts. So you can argue back with that as well. All right, so God is hidden. All right, so I think what possible goods could justify genocide. So conclusions. I don't see a flaw into this incompatibility argument. It's a technical argument in a way, but it also has emotional appeal. Animals dying, suffering of animals, God could prevent if he were omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, without interfering in anything else, human's free will or anything. But there would be smaller interventions than raising someone to life. I also can't see how Hitler's free will should be valued over the suffering, torture, and death of millions. And there we are, that's the end. Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Awesome. Well, you know what?
So how was that? Did that give you a good outline of how?
Yeah, I think that gave kind of a good summary of various positions, various counter responses, and then explain, what your take on those kind of responses are. So yeah, that was a very good overall summary of the field.
Good.
In terms of
I think I've tried to give, there's one or two, these probabilistic arguments, I don't think really, because I think they're confused about what probability is.
Okay.
If I think God probably exists, I'm not sure what we really mean by that.
All right, cool. So
but
that's
we all have it. We all have a kind of subjective idea of probability. And I'm talking, about my probability of the resurrection. That's been a big thing for me over the last couple of years, which is kind of like, can you imagine a needle on a dial?
Mm-hmm.
Which, and a needle 2 years ago, probability that Jesus rose from the dead, my subjective idea was about 0.9, and it's now just about below 0.5.
Yeah,
but it's a subjective. What it means is I don't believe on balance that Jesus was resurrected. That's what I mean.
Okay, cool. So I think that was fascinating, because believe it or not, most philosophers, as you probably know, they're the opposite of you, David KC. You kind of liked the logical deductive, the logical form of the argument. You think it works. Whereas most philosophers go for more of a probabilistic version. So that's cool. So let's skip addressing the probabilistic one. We can kind of focus on the logical version and also the incompatibility one if you want to. But Before we say anything, David Russell, you've been waiting a long time. You get to make your kind of opening speech now about the problem of evil, or you can respond to David Casey's opening, whatever you want to do.
Right now, I'm looking for a quote from Roe, who actually disagrees with David's take here. He does obviously hold to the probabilistic version, and I think he hit the nail on the head. He says that, and I can't find the quote right now in here, but yeah, Roe points out I found it. There's a fairly compelling argument for the view that the existence of evil is logically consistent with the existence of a theistic God, which is, which what I was going to say to like support Dale's conclusion, Dale. But, Dale, I don't have an opening speech. You didn't send me a outline of what we were doing.
Okay.
So, I mean, I could read you my response. I could just read my research paper here, but I mean, that would,
okay.
I mean, I don't know if I thought you had a format you wanted to go with. So I was just going to sit here and kind of back you up. So if you want to go through that format, we've heard all these before, we've heard these things and they obviously have answers. And I think the issue here is that, are you going to walk away with a changed mind, or you weighed all these options? You still think that it's better than, or, that, the belief that these are strong to defeat theism, or especially the Christian God, are stronger, or is the defenses make it more logically that Jesus is God, or that God, the Christian God, does exist? So.
Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, not a problem. So what I'd suggest then, so I want to split this up and look at general theism, not necessarily the Christian God first, see if what can work there. And then after that, now it's the Christian God specifically. So I think the first thing to do, David Casey, if you want to share your screen again and go back to your slides, let's start with the logical argument. You kind of already got our take on it, but we can maybe give a bit more detail now.
Yes, sure.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So here we are. Can you see that?
Yep.
Right. Just show the slide. All right, come on, guys. It's not showing. Come on. It's not.
It's showing up on our
Here we
screen.
are. Oh, right. It wants it to go. Sorry.
No worries.
It was there at the beginning, and it's not.
You just had it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Awesome. So obviously, let's take our time then. So obviously, the first premise. If God exists, then God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect. Definitely, I would agree with that. I'm pretty sure David Russell would. There may be some new, what does it mean for God to be omnipotent? What does that mean? He can make a square circle? No, of course not. He can't do the logically impossible. So there would need to be some nuance there. Secondly, it's not just that God can't do the logically impossible with each of these attributes individually, but it's got to be the maximal compossible degree that these three attributes that you've listed can be true together, the conjunction of all three of these attributes. So that might put some limitations on our expectations as to what God can do or not. But as it's stated, yes, with those qualifications, I would agree with premise one. David Russell, do you have anything to say on that one?
On premise one, no, I'm pretty much on the same scale with you there. Yeah, I don't know. We'll get into premise two. Just go ahead. I'll probably have something to say for that. I probably can save it for that. So.
Gotcha. So David Casey, you heard my response to premise one. Do you agree with those qualifications? Do you think that's a fair thing to put into this, or do you think it should just be unqualified noise?
Well, I think you'd have to be more specific about how you qualify it.
Gotcha.
But classical theism would just state all these attributes without trying to qualify it, wouldn't they? A classical theist would just state these attributes straight off.
I think that yeah, they might state them straight off, but they do have a meaning and explanation behind them. And I think Dale's explanation was pretty good, on at least from where I'm coming from.
Well, okay, omnipotent.
Yeah.
So you obviously omnipotent has to be defined as the power to do everything that is logically possible for God to do, or something like that.
Everything that is logically possible for,
yes, logically possible, yes,
yeah, for God to either do or have the ability to do, right?
Yeah.
In case of a
Yes.
second thing.
Yes.
Okay, all right, cool. So obviously premise 2 kind of spells this out. So if God is omnipotent in this qualified way, then God has the power to eliminate all evil, both natural and moral evil. We'll skip that distinction until we get to premise 7, because I agree with Russell. There's stuff to say about natural evil there, but okay, so
yeah, I think this is true. I mean, I think you have to accept premise 2. God could just create a paradise on earth. He could create the Garden of Eden before the fall. He could create heaven in advance, just populated by saved humanity without any evil. As the book of Revelation says, I think, doesn't it? It pictures the final state there. And all tears should be wiped from eyes, or something like that. God has the power. If we really believe that God is the creator of all, and that's part of, I think, the meaning of omnipotent there, is that God may create any universe he likes.
So, okay, so my response then is no, he doesn't. Well, in the first place, yes, God has the power, not necessarily to eliminate all evil, but to actualize a world that has no evil in it. So, for example, the world where God alone exists. God was perfection. There was no evil without creation, right? So yes, he has the power there. But the real question is, does God have the power to create a world with free will creatures, or a sufficient amount of free will creatures that has no evil in it? And on that front, I would say no.
Oh yes, but that's not the premise, is it? Bringing free will have to come into another premise, which might be 4 or 5, 4 and 5.
I consider them all.
If we're looking at premise 2, God, think of any evil you like, and God could stop it.
Well, okay, so I'll say this last bit, and then I'll turn it to David Russell, because I know he wanted to say something. So I would say no, this relates to premise 2. It's talking about God's, what does he have the power to do? We need to say there's a limit on God's power. He can't create a world or actualize a world where there's a sufficient amount of free will creatures who choose salvation or choose whatever to have an eternal relationship with him, and there's no evil. That is
but
impossible.
But that's not, we're talking about premise 2 here.
Okay, all right, David Russell, go for it then. Maybe
Dale, you can flesh it out a little bit more. I think I'm getting what you're saying. Yeah, I think God has the power to eliminate evil, but we have to start by defining our terms here, right? So evil's been defined for a long time as the corruption of good. I mean, that's the classical view, man. That's what the classical view of evil. It is really an argument taken from the notion that God made the entire creation good, like David was saying. Why didn't he create a paradise on earth? Well, he did. He actually put us in a garden and kept us safe from all the outside stuff that he wanted us to subdue. So, I mean, there's a purpose behind this whole thing. And however, with the freedom that we had, we corrupted it somehow. And like C.S. Lewis says, badness is only spoiled goodness. Philip Carey, a philosopher that specializes in this field as well, in God and the Problem of Evil 5 views, he says, corruption means a loss of form, which amounts to the loss of being, a tendency towards decay, destruction, and death. And he's given the Augustinian notion here. When a house is thoroughly corrupted, it loses the form or structure of of a house and thus fails to be a house. It falls into ruin and becomes no longer a house at all, but a disordered heap of stone and wood and scattered materials. But in our modern context, I know we often just associate evil with suffering and pain, when we also know that sometimes pain is good. My muscles stretching, causing me pain, is a good thing because I'm building muscle mass. So there's a reality that we live in as well that we have to explore, and there's a purpose behind it. And the fact that we actually did corrupt ourselves, now we're bearing the consequences of that forever, I mean, or not forever, but until the eschaton. So I think there's a very real thing that's going on here. And yes, I think God did create a paradise. He did create a world without evil. And then he gave us the choice and said, hey, look, to have true freedom, you have to have the choice to either do good or do bad, or, you have to have a real choice to choose from, either me or not me. And we chose to try to be our own gods. Dale, is that kind of, am I off on that? I mean,
Yeah, no,
you want to add?
I think what you're saying is right, and that sort of thing. I hear David KC's complaint that he thinks, well, this isn't technically part of premise 2. I think that
no, it's not. It's not on premise 2. You haven't said anything against premise 2 yet.
I wanted to make a qualification because I don't see it fitting it can fit under premise 4 as well, but the way you've worded premise 4, I wanted right here when you talk about that power to eliminate all evil. So God does not have the power to all possible worlds. I picture God, he is the grounding of all possible worlds. All potentialities exist within him. So we're assuming that kind of thing, right? So God doesn't have the power to, there's a possible world that's the created world where a sufficient, the maximal number of free-willed creatures choose to be saved or choose to have an eternal loving relationship with God, their ultimate purpose in creation. And there's no evil. God can't take that and then just strip away the evil. He doesn't have the power. And I wanted to mention that here because it's not related to God's desires. Of course, God would desire that there would be a world where every single person and the maximal number of persons choose to fulfill their ultimate purpose in creation, and yet there's no evil. Of course, God would desire that. But it's about, does he have the power to create that world or not? And one of my objections would be that no, he wouldn't. He can't just create this final state.
You say God doesn't have the power to create a world with no evil. Are you saying that?
I'm saying, so there are possible worlds where perhaps there's no evil in it, but it's not the optimal world. Let's say there's better worlds than that. He could create a world where there's just pink bunnies, right?
Yeah, God may prefer not to, may have other reasons, but we're still talking about premise 2, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that flows into premise 2, purpose and plan, right?
No,
is that what we're saying, Dale?
This is power. It's about premise 2 is about God's power. It's
yes,
about
we're trying to question how he uses that power. I mean, I think that fits in. Is that what I'm hearing from you, Dale?
No, there's not premise 2. Premise 2 is about the power that God has. If God is omnipotent, then God has the power to eliminate evil.
Okay, so if we're going to be technical about so yes, David, that was what I was trying to say, and I think that's relevant. But I'm trying my best to be
very
charitable
relevant,
to David.
yeah.
This is David.
Yeah, absolutely.
Argument. So let me try to. Okay, great. So does God have the power to eliminate all evil? So this premise is assuming evil exists. However it got there, it exists. Now, can God eliminate all evil, like prevent all instances from coming about? Yes, he has the power to step in and prevent every single instance of evil from.
Indeed. If evil is corruption, as David is saying, he could eliminate the corruption in an instance if he's omnipotent.
Well, it depends on if he has attributes of holiness and justice and stuff like that. That would all come into play. However, on the surface level, if you're saying power, yes, God can wipe away all evil and just eliminate it. He can eliminate us in the process.
I mean, you've talked about you've talked about the eschaton, and this is the eschaton, isn't it? God recreates in the vision of the end times, which he restores.
Yes,
God restores creation.
He restores,
in an instant. God, and if you don't believe that God has the power to do that, you don't believe that God is omnipotent.
No, of course we believe God is omnipotent. We say that he can on the technical level. I think Dale answered you that yes, he can eliminate evil. I think he can eliminate us with it because we are evil.
Of course. Well, if he wishes to, yes. So we're arguing about premise 2, but I don't see how you can do that. I think premise 2 is solid. If God is omnipotent, then he has the power.
Yeah,
I think we're wasting time because you want to get on to premise 4 and 5, don't you?
Okay, so let me say this last thing then, because I think that like you're kind of missing what we're trying to say. So it is about power, right? So number 1, step 1, does omnipotence include
a little bit there?
What? All right, can you guys hear me, or are you guys still there? Or? Hello? Like re-record.
All right.
So yeah, I'll have to put these together in editing. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah.
That Canadian internet,
Rogers. Okay, so David can see that's the only reason why the power thing is coming here. I'm just trying to get that. Look, God, if we can just admit at this point, God doesn't have the power to determine a libertarian free will creature in terms of not sinning and maintain their freedom. He can do it by taking away their freedom or intervening against their wills or something like that. So is that a good enough acceptance?
Yes, but we're talking about the argument that we've got in front of us here. And I think you both agreed that the argument is logically valid. And that's what you said at the beginning.
Yeah.
So the question is, if you don't agree with the argument, as you obviously don't, then you've got to say which premise is wrong and why. And we're still on premise 2, and which is about the power of God. Now, if and you haven't said anything that shows us that the premise is false.
Okay. So as logicians, and Dale can attest to this too, David. I don't know your background as much. I can't remember off the top of my head. But as a logician myself, the validity of the argument is different from the soundness of the argument, right? So the validity, the way you lay it out is logically the form is valid. The form of the argument is valid. Yeah. Even if we disagree with the premise, the form of the argument is still valid. So just because we disagree with the premise doesn't make the form of your argument valid. So when you tell us that is it logically valid, we're looking at the form, right? And Dale, you can confirm that too, right?
Yeah, of course. Okay. So the validity is all about the logical relationship. We've conceded that the argument is valid. Again, I need more time to double check it because you've got you've got a conditional that's also got a disjunctive in it. So there may be
we really need and the thing is we would really need I know for me, I would have to take your argument and go over it probably for the rest of the day in symbolic form. And
so why don't we call this part 1 and then schedule another session for part 2 when you've had a chance to go over it, and then we'd have a really good informed discussion. Well, I can see that all these premises, of course, they involve terms, and terms have to be defined. Mm-hmm. So there's that issue which you raised, and we can't really get around that. There's a problem of the issue of definition. What does it mean to be omnipotent? We know that to be omnipotent does not mean that you can make a a square circle, you know, or a married bachelor. You know, that kind of understanding is implicit, but we're still in the context of the argument for evil. I think we have a fair idea what's meant by these terms: omnipotent, omniscient, morally perfect. And so we've all got a good idea of what this argument's trying to do. We think it's valid, but we're not sure. The question is whether it's sound, and whether it's sound means, are the premises true? We think the conclusions may follow from the premises. That's what it looks like. But certainly a Christian would want to reject at least one of these premises. And that's what we're talking about. But if we, you know, like to go and call it a stop there, and then schedule another session when we, you say schedule, don't you? Schedule another session when we can go through it in more detail. How about that?
So you're saying you want to end right now?
Well, I don't, it's up to you. It's up to you. I'm fine to go on for another half hour. But we you know, we're looking at the argument. We wanted to go back to the outline, which is good. And but if we really want to discuss these premises and this argument in detail, then, as you say, you want to study it first before we can discuss it.
I was just saying, like, for the validity, I would need time, because you've got premises with multiple argument forms in it. So let's assume it's valid. I just care about the soundness. That's all I care about, or the deductive strength, right? Which is another way of saying it. Are these premises reasonable?
Yes.
So with this will be the last thing I say with premise 2, and then we can move on. So I would deny that God has the power to create a world where the same number of people are in a state of salvation, that heaven-like state, whatever it is, and there's no evil. So that God doesn't have the power to create that. So that's where I would have the issue with that.
But, okay, but that's not against premise 2.
Well, it's an evil for them not to have a relationship with, for less people to have a relationship.
Okay, so we're now talking about the definition of evil then. If we're going to say that an evil is related to the number of people having free will, that really does go outside the kind of evil which this argument is directed to.
Okay.
And then you're bringing in the free will defense implicitly in your idea of evil, aren't you?
Gotcha. So, okay, so you have
is that right? Whereas we're not talking, I mean, we're talking, you know, premise 7, we're talking, the common sense understanding here is that natural evils are things like earthquakes, you know, tsunamis, and moral evils are things like murders, tortures, genocides. But if you're bringing in, you know, your free will defense into your understanding of evil, that turns the whole thing round and inside out, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's probably where we're kind of differentiate, because I think that's included as a moral evil, right? So,
but even so, you know, Dale, I could say God could bring in the new heaven and earth tomorrow. Yeah. And he could create a new humanity with free will who only wish to do good. He could recreate creation, or he could bring in the Garden of Eden and without and stop Adam and Eve from falling. So even under your kind of rather, I think, idiosyncratic idea of evil, God has the power to eliminate that.
I don't think he does. So yeah, maybe get into the biblical perspective briefly, right? So let's pretend, envision your scenario: Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They're morally perfect, they're sinless, and all of this. There's no evil. Forgetting about the snake, or whether that's Satan and stuff like that. No evil, perfect. Now they're presented with the choice. Part of that perfection is having the potential evil. Only actualized evil. God can't create actualized evil, but it's good to create the potential for evil. That's part of inherent as part of being a free will creature. So that needs to be there, the potential for evil. That's part of perfection.
Yes, but we're talking about, okay, well, that's your idea of perfection, but creation was good, but all right, potential for evil. Okay, but why
And
do you have to have evil?
yeah,
Why
well,
can't you have potential for evil without evil?
so here's what I'm saying. So let's pretend they didn't eat the apple. They took the thing and okay, they continue on living sinless. God, I would argue that it's impossible for that the Garden of Eden was not the end state. They had to go through that evil state, kind of like a virtue ethicist perspective, to cultivate their characters in order to reach that end state.
Well, okay, that's the soul making, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
the soul making. Yeah, but why you haven't answered the question though? Why can't you have potential for evil in a perfect creation without the actual evil? Why have the snake? I mean, without the snake, according to the story, if you believe the story, it's the snake that spoke to Eve, wasn't it? So there didn't have to be a snake there. God could have stepped on the snake and squashed it.
Yeah, it's so they needed the choice, the chance for the choice in order to achieve their final state, their ultimate purpose. So on one hand, they could have chosen not to eat the fruit and then they would arrive there instantly or something. Let's say that.
Okay.
On the,
Yeah,
on
this
the other
is the soul making theodicy, Dale. So
but
it's really premise 4 and 5 that we're talking about, not premise 2.
Yes. So that's fine. But
that's what I was saying to you, that I think that it's premise 4 or stroke 5 is what the two of you need to reject and say that God has other priorities than just eliminating evil.
Gotcha.
You've mentioned the soul making, achieve their purpose.
But what makes it impossible is the free will defense. So it's both, right?
Okay.
I would also throw in some skeptical.
So free will and the soul making. All right, but logically they are distinct, aren't they?
They don't have to be. I mean,
Yeah, they don't, there's no limit on them.
Okay, yeah. So you say for exercising free will to develop ultimate purpose, is that right? Goal?
Yeah, to arrive in that ultimate state.
So Adam and Eve had to be perfected.
Yes.
And presumably, Cain and Abel were also likewise perfected. Is that right? Cain would have been also perfected by his evil.
Well, Cain and Abel came
when
in.
He was banished.
Well, they came in after the fall, right? So they're slightly different. Like they've got this sinful nature or this sinful disease. So there is a slight difference compared to like Adam and Eve, who were sinless.
Yeah, I mean, you can't divorce it from the theology either, and that's what I think Dale's saying.
Okay, so so this is why, I would have thought that you'd be wanting to sort of focus on these kind of the theodicies rather than question premise 2.
Well, that's what I'm doing now. I've moved on from that, and I'm just.
Oh, you sorry, I didn't realize. I thought we were still on premise.
No,
premise 2.
My fault. I should have. Yeah, I've just, because you've only got half an hour. I'm trying to respect your time, so I'm just moving on and giving sort of what I think the theodicy, or really it's a defense, right? Because I don't.
Do we want to move on to the free will and the soul making theodicy? This is where we're going, isn't it?
Yeah.
Soul making and free will defense.
So it's with me, and I should let David argue his take. For me, it's the soul making thing, but free will is required in order to make your soul, in order to develop to that final state. And unfortunately, God doesn't have the power to control our free will decisions and maintain our freedom without interfering. And in order for us to develop our soul, we need to make that choice the right way. Well, oops, Adam and Eve didn't. So because they didn't, in order to make their souls, they have to go through this fallen world and become redeemed and go through all of the stuff, a world full of the evils that we have.
Okay, but then why was that necessary for Adam? If we're talking about Adam and Eve, why was evil necessary? I think this is what I said at the beginning. is why do we have to have all this evil in the first place?
It's because, for me, it's because that's the choice they made. If they had made the other choice, then we wouldn't have the fallen world. They would have
Yes,
arrived at.
but God created everything. Presumably, he created knowing in advance what Adam and Eve would do, and
Yeah.
he would have created them. If he hadn't want that, he wouldn't have created a universe where that happened. I mean, he created a universe with a snake in it who spoke to them. As I said, he could have stepped on the snake or not had a snake at all.
Well, the snake, I mean, that's, if you're taking that literally, that's Lucifer, and he made his own choice. So we can just take
Yes,
it
but
a step back.
God made Lucifer, didn't he? I mean, on that assumption.
Yeah.
So why did God make Lucifer? Why couldn't God have managed a perfect creation without Lucifer?
He could. God wants as many free will creatures as possible, right? So it's a numbers game to some extent as well, to make their souls, to develop their souls to that end state. So sure, maybe he could, there are possible worlds where he doesn't make Lucifer, but because of that, Adam and Eve sin in a different way, and even more people are damned.
Well, why is that, Dale? I mean, this is the argument that Mackie makes, is why can't you just have a creation where people have got free will and just do good out of their free will? And why is it a numbers game? Where do we see the numbers game? You want to go to the Bible. So where do we see the talk about the numbers of people saved as being any kind of objective for God? Where's that described in the Bible?
Oh, it's all over the place. He wants as many people as possible to be saved and enter a loving relationship with God. It's
actually, isn't it? God desires that all men should be saved.
Yeah.
Not as many as possible, but all.
Yeah, but there's the qualification there, right? Because we also have free will, so it's up to us whether we get saved or not.
Well, the universalists would disagree with you there, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But
I mean, a universalist would look at that verse and say all means all.
Yeah. So do you understand the philosophical component though? First,
I do. I disagree with it though. I mean, I take Mackie's point really, is that, and we've got if it's numbers, God could just create a creation with innumerable free-willed good people in a perfect creation without Satan, without Lucifer, without a snake.
No, he couldn't, because they wouldn't have their soul. Not as many people would have their souls made. So that's the claim. That's my defense. But
okay, so you're really putting a lot of money on the soul making here.
Yeah, and
yeah,
the souls are made through free will. But I want to make something clear though, because I don't bear the burden of proof at all. This is a defense, not a theodicy necessarily. And you, as the
we're softening the theodicy to a defense.
Correct. Yeah, I can't prove that this is true. I can't prove, like, how many souls are saved in this world versus another world. I have no way to prove it. I think the best the Christian can do is provide a defense. It's on the atheist. The atheist is claiming that evil, the existence of evil, proves, in your case, you're taking a logical form, proves, absolutely guarantees that God doesn't exist. And I'm just saying, well, what if this scenario is the case? And this explains why. It's an equally plausible explanation as to why there's evil and yet God can still exist. You, Mr. Atheist, if you say that's wrong, prove it. Prove that no, this scenario can't happen.
Okay, could I come back to you then, Dale, on that?
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I would, I mean, there is some truth there in, I mean, there's some, what's the word? There's some attraction there to this argument, and we can see its truth in particular examples of people's lives. If we look at some people's lives, is that by suffering they develop, and as Irenaeus, they grow into children of God. So we can see this happening with certain classes of people. However, as a general argument, it doesn't deal with particulars. So you can see this comment I've got at the bottom here, is that it doesn't apply to everybody. only to particular people, particular kinds of people, those people that learn from suffering, people who die in senseless suffering, those who die in childbirth, those who die from horrible diseases, the Jews and the Slavs that were sent into the gas chambers, their souls weren't made by, putting into ovens and killed. They just died. They just suffered and died. So it doesn't have a plausibility for me. Now you can go right. I mean, as you said, you want to weaken the argument to a defense and say, for all we know, God might value those souls that were developed through evil and suffering higher than the evil suffered by all the people dying in genocides. So that's what you're saying now, is that for all we know, God might value one soul that learns through suffering and grows over all millions of people who die in genocides. Is that your kind of argument there? For all we know, God might value that higher.
Yeah, well, yeah, I do think that making souls, so to speak, or getting more souls into a state of salvation is worth more than just preserving earthly lives. So I would argue that. But one thing I do want to make clear here about your main objection, and then I promise I will shut up and let David Russell say something, because I want to fit him in here. But the point is, I'm not arguing that it's a ridiculous thing to argue that it's necessary, logically necessary, that in order to make your soul, you have to experience suffering. Because no, I mean, the heck with that. There are angels in heaven. They never rebelled against, they've always been sinless, and they're in that state. They don't need to go through that. Same with the infant type of, depending on your notion of original sin or how you view that.
Yeah.
But the point that I'm making, it's a numbers game, but that's not the case. For some people, they, because of the choices Adam and Eve made, or the choices, they do need to go through this to arrive at that state. So it's not that everyone necessarily would, but that God knows who needs to go through that versus who doesn't, in order to arrive at the most number of free will creatures choosing to be saved. If that makes sense. And Russell, you can go. I'll shut up.
Well, you guys covered a lot, and he was directing his David was directing his responses to you, because it was more you and him at that point. But there's a lot to be said here, and I think that there's a lot that has to be also taken into consider. What about how much good is in the world as well? What about love? What about the ultimate ethic here? I think Plantinga puts it really good when he says a world containing free creatures who are significantly free and freely perform more good than evil actions is more valuable, all else being equal, than a world containing no free creatures at all. Now, God can create free creatures, but he can't cause or determine them to only do what's right. For if he does so, then they aren't significantly free at all. They don't do what is right freely. So, I mean, for me, this puts it as, God gave humanity a real world with real choices that had real consequences. Making a world with libertarian free will doesn't mean God can create any possible world he wants. That's where I agree with Dale. He does not violate his nature by doing logically impossible things. We've already discussed that. If God grants people genuine freedom to choose moral good or to choose how they like, then it would be impossible for him to guarantee that what those choices would be. Imagine if someone forces another to make alternative choice than what they want. They're no longer free. C.S. Lewis argues pretty much the same way. I think the moment you have a self at all, there's a possibility of putting yourself first, wanting to be the center, wanting to be God. There's a lot of factors, like I said, like go into this, right? So I agree a lot with what Dale's saying here. So, I mean, that's why I really didn't pipe in or add anything in that I think you guys missed. So,
okay, cool. Yeah, David Kemball, I'll let you kind of is there anything that David Russell said that you want to interact with him a bit before we?
Yes, no, yeah, so I would say, yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, I would say that the free will defense, and it's a defense, not a theodicy, is maybe the strongest one. I think the soul making, no. I mean, I take Dale's point on that, but and the natural order, no, I don't get that, but I don't rate that highly. But the free will defense, I think, is the strongest counter to the argument that one could put forward. It's the strongest card which the Christian theologian can play, I think. But my counter to that is the one I've already made, is quoting here J.L. Mackie, is that why could not God create just a universe with free will where people do good out of their free will? As we've said, we talked about the garden before the fall, or we talked about the new heaven and the new earth, where people will have free will, presumably, and do good, or there'll be no evil there. So we got these two states here as described in the Bible, where people have free will, but there is no evil. So why have evil at all? That's the thing. And then, of course, Dale will come in and say, because they've got to have their souls made. But looking at the free will defense only.
But you see what you're doing here? I'm sorry. Go ahead, finish. I'm sorry.
I finished. I've made my counter to the free will defense. I've said it's your strongest card. But I think my counter is stronger than yours. I don't think you have an answer.
I do.
The free will defense. Okay.
I do, because you're implying here that God can create a universe with free will where people only do good out of their free will. So, I mean, where's the choice? That's not really free will. I mean, that's really not free will at that point. There is no choice there, because all you can do is good. There is no choice. So, I mean, that's where this is. Well, what's there to choose from?
No, you misunderstand me. I mean, think about heaven. Will people have free will in heaven?
Absolutely.
So will there be evil in heaven?
There could be.
There could be.
Yes, absolutely. Satan was in heaven, right?
We're talking about the eschaton.
No, we're not. We're talking about Satan right now. Satan had free will in heaven, right?
No. I'm talking about the last state where.
I understand. I understand, but you have to. It's the same, because Satan rebelled while he was in heaven. Okay. This is, if you're talking about restoration on church, on the earth and how that works, and is sanctification automatically done at the end of the world? Again, you have to address my theodicy here, and my defense is that no, I don't think sanctification is done right after death. I think it's a continual process, and just because we're justified and glorified, I still think that we're going to be doing things that bring us to a more perfected state. So, and I don't know how that works. All I can do is just go off of my theology here, and go off of my idea of how this might work. I think it's beautifully described. I look at heaven and stuff like that, and I think you have to use a little imagination when you look at heaven, right? So when I look at heaven, okay, I see that I try to picture what C.S. Lewis describes in The Great Divorce, right? The guy goes up, and it's hard for him to walk at first, but as he gets closer to the mountain, right, it gets softer, the ground gets softer, everything that was looking pale and dark becomes beautiful, and it continues like that. So I'm not sure exactly how everything works as when I go to heaven. I just know that Jesus says he has a place for me. And if he has a place for me, I think that there could be something to that effect, to where I don't want to commit sin anymore. I've been actualized to the point where I don't want to commit that sin anymore. And who knows exactly, right? I think
that's my point. Yeah.
I just wanted to summarize, because I know you were kind of confused. What David Russell's saying is that in the final state, there could be sin, but there won't be. That's a funny distinction. You probably get it, right? So that's what he's
Oh, I thought David was saying there would be sin.
No, I said there could be.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Just
Well,
like
right,
because
so there's no evil. There's no evil there in the final state. There is no evil. There's free will, but no evil.
but there's still the potential to commit evil. Yeah.
Yes, but no, there would be no actual evil.
Yeah, because everything at that point is still completed. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think that there's still. Do I have free will in heaven? Yes. Is there some way that how does that look per se? I don't know. Is it like C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce? Am I still getting sanctified after in this because this we're looking at heaven right now, but we have to distinguish the eschaton now is when the earth is restored, right? So I don't think we have a full picture of exactly what that looks like when mankind is back on the world. So I just there's a lot with a question mark there for me on that aspect. But it also, given the light of all the other arguments that make it more probable that the Christian God exists, also help reinforce what I believe about the end and my theology and so forth.
One thing I might want to throw in just to add on to what David Russell said. So again, it's me throwing in a little bit of soul making via free will, but to help you understand, well, it's obviously possible that in the end state that sins won't be actualized, and we would all say yes, but like for certain people, I'm saying that it's necessary to go through in order to develop their souls where they won't sin. So you might take an example. Maybe there's some girl that she goes out, she dresses very almost naked or something like that, and she goes clubbing and she flirts with all these random guys and stuff like that and teases them or something, and then one night tragically she gets raped or something, and this traumatizes her or something like that, so that what the heck is happening here? Okay, but then in the final state, because of that incident, she has the ability to dress up like that and to go out and flirt with these guys and stuff like that, but she won't do that ever again, in part because of what she's been through. So she still has the ability to choose either way, but she won't. Whereas before she went through this, she made the wrong choices and stuff.
And you also got to look, you have to throw in the omniscient aspect. Is God saying that there is going to be no more sin in heaven because he knows that the process he's putting us through will bring us to that conclusion? Unlike Satan, where Satan still had the free will in heaven and he did rebel, so you got to consider those things as well.
Okay, I'm running out of time.
It's okay.
You can get the final.
It's a deep subject that requires this type of time, and fleshing out.
We've had a very good discussion, and as I hoped you would, you've picked on the premise 4 really, and premise 5 of the logical argument, and in attacking those premises, you're majoring Dale more on the soul making, Theodicy or defense, and David on the free will. But as you said, they two kind of go together in your minds, because we're talking about soul making in the exercise of free will.
Yeah, there is no soul making without your exercising.
Yeah, exactly.
There's more. When I was in my problem and evil class, I just can't think of it off the top of my head, so you'll have to forgive me. But there is another. There's a couple other theodicies that weren't mentioned here, that I also hold to. So I don't like to give myself a label, so I don't say I hold to the free will defense and soul making. I take a little bit from the soul making, a lot from the free will, a little bit from the other ones, and that's kind of how I piece my entire view on that. And I think that's the best we can do. I don't, and if I'm not willing to learn, You know,
Yeah.
I need to continue to learn. You know, I
Yes.
can't stop. You know, so if I find something that makes more sense, I can probably replace it or add to it. You know, but yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, David KC, this is your show. I'm going to give you the last word because I know you got to
Okay.
go. But yeah, I would say you kind of pitched. Maybe we can come back. So I will open that invitation to both of you if you want to come back and focus on something specific or something that whatever you guys want to do. So absolutely, you're welcome. But with that said, David KC, take it away for the last word.
Okay, thank you very much, Dale and David. It's been a really interesting discussion, and you brought out some things here in these theodicies and defenses which I hadn't thought about, but I still think, as the argument. As I said, I think that there's the incompatibility argument does go through. I don't have a big emotional investment in that because the idea of animals dying alone in the forest is not something that's really close to my experience. But intuitively, the idea that omnipotent, omniscient, morally perfect God really could do something about that if he didn't have other concerns in mind. And the question is, what might those be? You guys focused on free will defense and soul making. And I do think the free will defense is the strongest card that the Christian can play there. But for the reasons I gave, I don't think either theodicy or defense is valid. I think just God could create paradise without bringing in the snake, or create heaven without fully populated with free will, without evil, without all the stuff that people have to go through first. But then the soul making you bring in, and but then the soul making has to deal with the problem, all the people who die and suffer without their souls being made at all. So it's a very selective, partial kind of defense there. So I'm not convinced by either, but you brought out stuff that I hadn't thought about. And so I think for me, I believe that a God of some kind exists, but it's not a God that lives up to these definitions in premise one. I think that omnipotent, omniscient, morally perfect. I'm thinking that a God that exists maybe just doesn't measure up to our ideas of them in some way, that we just have got it wrong about God. I think the Christian idea of God is somehow deficient, is that we somehow got it wrong about God being all loving or morally perfect. Maybe he's just not caring in that way that we think he ought to be about us. Or maybe he's just not omnipotent in the way we think he is. Or maybe he just doesn't want to intervene at all. Maybe he just doesn't know things. I don't know, but it's this premise one, I think, and these ideas about God is that I think are suspect. There's some kind of God, but whether it's the God that the Christians think he is another matter. So I think this argument goes through, but then I have other reasons for not believing in the Christian story or narrative, and this is just one of them. Maybe this is the main one either. Okay, well, thank you, Dale and David. Do you want to finish off, Dale, and summarize?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to both of you guys. David KC, David Russell, I consider you guys both friends, and this is a passionate project and that sort of thing, topic and everything. So I was just really glad to be able to kind of present some of my thinking and bounce some of those ideas off you and see what your thinking is. Obviously, at the end of the day, when I actually care about David KC, when I heard that you lost your faith, that's why I really wanted to bring you on, because you're someone I know, you're really smart, and I've seen some of your writings and stuff like that. So it wasn't the typical atheist or skeptic who's kind of set in their ways, like some of the ones I've had to deal with in the past. You're someone I think is really seeking the truth. So I really wanted to try my best to give my best answers. Ultimately, if you buy it, great. If you don't, that's a shame, but I had to give it a shot. So I was happy to have you guys on it. Hopefully it was good on both of your guys' end.
Oh yeah. I mean, do I get a closing statement or what?
Yeah, go ahead, Russell. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, just for myself, there is some things that I take away from what David was saying about, uh, you know, God's something that maybe we don't have quite nailed down yet, right? I think that's also true in a way. The minute we think we have God nailed down, I think that we are probably further from the truth than possible. Do I believe that Jesus is God? Yes. Do I claim that I've nailed Jesus down 100%? No. All I can do is spend eternity getting to know him. And that's kind of my approach to this, instead of abandoning it because there's some arguments I haven't quite fleshed out. And I'm not saying this is what you did, David, but just for my own stuff, just because there's arguments that may not make sense to me all the time. I have found that God reveals himself and gives me more answers as I continue on. And I expect that trend will continue. I know a lot of people that have deconstructed recently, and it breaks my heart on just the basis of saying, well, God, I cried out to God with my whole heart and he just didn't answer me. He was silent. And it just breaks me because to me, I open the scriptures and they're alive to me. And when I see Jesus and I learn more about Jesus, my world just opens up brighter and brighter. And as C.S. Lewis says, I don't believe in Christianity because like the sun is risen. I believe it because by everything is how I see it. So so I kind of hold to that, and I butchered that quote because I forgot it right off the top of my head. But that's kind of how I see it, and that's how it's been for me. And every time I try to get out of that, I feel the power of God just dragging me back to it. So and I know some people don't have that experience. I don't know, or maybe they're just not sensitive to it. But yeah, I do, and that's where I'll go with that, Dale.
Awesome. Yeah, well, with that said, I will close out. But yeah, thanks for the audience for listening. The next show I have up is actually going to be a very short show, just so the audience knows. A fan of mine named Harry Stark sent me a video of his defending the Christian religion versus various other religions like Buddhism, Islam, polytheism, and that. It's a short 17-minute video, and he asked me if I would post it up on my channel and do kind of a feedback review of it. So look forward to that. It'll be a short show, but that's what I have coming up next. And on that, have a great week.